The Oregon Trail, California Trail, and Mormon Trail all followed roughly the same line across North America, and for that reason, we collectively call them the Immigrant Trail. A major portion of the trail goes through central Wyoming, entering where the Platte River runs into Nebraska and exiting with Interstate 80 at Utah. Perhaps the most iconic part of the route, one that was of great importance to travelers, is near the middle of the state at the south end of the Wind River Range. I'm standing on the Continental Divide at South Pass, and I'm at the south end of the Wind River Range. And I'm within eyesight, to my south, of the Oregon Buttes. They were named the Oregon Buttes because you knew when you got to within eyesight of the Oregon Buttes, you were basically entering Oregon country. And you had pretty much a downhill shot into either Oregon, California, or Utah. There was a belief in the growing country, characterized as America's manifest destiny by writer John O'Sullivan, that the United States would someday rule from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. For this to happen, the United States would have to acquire territory, both from the indigenous people and the world powers. These wagon ruts were actually originally laid by the men supplying the mountain men rendezvous. However, that changed in the 1840s. The dispute over parts of North America with the British was settled in 1846, and an area they called Columbia Territory, which consisted of Washington, Oregon, parts of Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming, went to the United States. Areas to the north, what we now think of as Canada, went to the British. Oregon Territory became American territory, and as such, people began moving here in droves. Peace with the British over North America was important, but an even bigger piece of the United States came from the demise of the great Spanish and Mexican Empire to the south. The 1848 Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which ended the Mexican-American War, ceded California and most of the American Southwest to the United States. With that, the boundaries of the contiguous United States were set roughly where they are today, and that sent thousands of people west in a hope of finding their own land and a new life. People traveling on this 5-month journey had to live off the land. That meant they lived off wildlife. So within a half-day's journey on either side of the trail, all the wildlife was hunted out of existence. The trees were cut down. You had to cook, so trees were cut for firewood. Pretty soon there were no trees. They started cutting up the sagebrush. Eventually the sagebrush ran out. Meanwhile, livestock were eating the grass down to nothing. All of the grass was consumed, and what it basically left behind was this wide swath of dust and sand running right through the middle of the country where nothing really lived. Chief Washakie of the Eastern Shoshone actually referred to it as the white man's river of destruction. 19th and 20th century popular culture has given us a vision of wagon trains being attacked by Indians, but this was actually a rare occurrence. We all know the term circle the wagons. Getting your wagon company together, creating a circle so you have a defensive perimeter. Wagon companies did this virtually every night, but it usually wasn't as a defensive perimeter. The Native Americans knew that most of the wildlife was dead along the trail, and it was just not a healthy place to be, so they generally stayed away. You did a defensive perimeter, not for the defensive side, but because that perimeter on the inside of it, you could keep your livestock in it. Kept the livestock in it, you didn't need to go looking for it the next morning. In fact, only about 4% of the people killed out here died from Indian attacks. However, a lot of people died. When you have 400,000 or 500,000 people traversing the country, you have a lot of fecal matter. Cholera is spread in fecal matter. And cholera was rampant in the ponds and the streams along the trail. Now everyone setting out in Missouri knew this, so they planned to boil their water. But how could they? They got out here and found out there's no trees. There's not even sagebrush. We can't light a fire. How are we going to boil the water? Well, they couldn't. So they had to drink untreated water. And that meant about 5% of them from 1850 on died in the journey across the country. If that number's a little bit much, well, then we'll say, let's say 15,000 people died out here. That's a person every quarter mile. But if that number's accurate, and it probably is, that means there is a grave on the Oregon Trail roughly every 500 feet. Shallow, unmarked graves can be found all across Wyoming, but cholera didn't just kill immigrants. It killed indigenous people as well, as they lived along the very streams that were polluted. Cholera could flow downstream for hundreds of miles before infecting an area, and in some cases, entire bands of the Cheyenne and Arapaho died of the waterborne illness. The strain on the resources along the trail did put a strain on the people who had lived there, and that did put a strain on relations between the big white tribe in the east and the tribes out in the west. The indigenous tribes varied in their approach to the new white tribe that was passing through. Washakie of the eastern Shoshone pursued a peaceful approach as he recognized the size of the newcomers would make them a good ally against the tribes he was already at war with. The Lakota and Cheyenne, led by Red Cloud, let it be known that the immigrants passing through would not be tolerated to the north on Lakota land. Eventually, that big white tribe from the east would begin to settle along the Oregon Trail in the Intermountain West and on the Great Plains, but that really didn't happen in earnest until after the Civil War. From the 1830s to the 1860s, for the most part, Wyoming was a place you just passed through. And if you think about it, even today, Wyoming, with a population of 500,000 people or so, that's still kind of the way it is.
Yeah.